In some of my recent videos, I have been talking about retirement income strategies, like sustainable withdrawal rates, the 4% rule of thumb, the spending smile. This week, we're gonna talk a little more about retirement income strategies and some other research that was done in the 2000s. Now, before I get started, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, I would subscribe. That way you get notified when I post videos in the future. All right, so let's talk through some follow-up research that was done by a gentleman named Johnathan Gutyon and William Klinger. They wrote a research paper in 2006. This one was titled Decision Rules and Maximum Initial Withdrawal Rates. The reason why they wrote this paper and did this research is because they were analyzing the 4% rule that was written in 1994, I believe. And they discovered a couple of things with that rule of thumb. Number one, it's very rigid. And I kind of hit on that in my last video. Retirement spending is not linear. There may be years where you need to spend more money because you need to upgrade your home, or maybe you want to help a child with a down payment on a house. There's many examples. The other thing was that research on the 4% rule of thumb assumed just 30 years of retirement. Not everybody's retirement is 30 years. Maybe you're in a position to retire early, or maybe you have longevity in your family. And so you want to plan for as long as a 40-year retirement. So the research that was done by Gutyon and Klinger assumes up to 40 years of retirement. So let's jump into this retirement income strategy. I am not going to try and explain it to you, everything on this paper. I'm going to do another drawing because I know how much you loved my drawing that I did on the retirement spending smile. So let's pull up the doodle pad and walk through this. So we're starting with a 5% initial withdrawal rate. See that? Already, the rule of thumb on the other research was 4%. So we're already giving ourselves a $10,000 raise if we're assuming a $1 million portfolio. We're taking out $50,000 a year with this approach. And we have retired. So we're starting right over here, day one, 50,000 bucks a year. Now, I am not going to adjust for inflation this withdrawal amount, the 50,000 in the number example, because it gets really confusing. I'm just going to assume $50,000 a year. You'll get the idea. And let's just say we're taking out our 50,000 bucks a year, and all of a sudden you hit a bull market or a significant stock rally, and your portfolio has increased in value dramatically over, say the first 5 years of retirement, all while taking out your $50,000 a year. So the rule of thumb is, in the decision, is that you don't have to, but you can give yourself a raise. The trigger for that raise is if your initial withdrawal rate, which was 5%, decreases by 20%. So your initial withdrawal rate of 5 decreases by 20%. The reason why it would decrease is because your portfolio value is increasing and you're taking out your 50,000. So you're taking 50,000 from a larger pile of money. So naturally it's a lower withdrawal rate. So if it's 20% below your initial, give yourself a 10% raise. So your 50,000 would be 55,000. Okay. And then that's your new withdrawal rate. And again, you adjust that for inflation. Now, let's say after that, all of a sudden recession hits, stock market starts to sell off, and then all of a sudden your account is going down with the equity markets and you hit what's called the lower guardrail down here. And the same approach, but the opposite would kick in, where if your initial withdrawal rate increased by 20%, decrease spending by 10%. So a increase of 20% on this initial 5 would be a 6% withdrawal rate. So therefore, your 55,000 would then 55K would become 10% less than 55K is 49,500. You get the idea. And the guardrails, these are the triggers. They call them guardrails in the research paper. And the idea behind this is that if you have a significant bull market and your portfolio is doing well, you don't want to necessarily leave a mattress stuffed full of money to your children because maybe that's not one of your objectives. So you have the opportunity and ability to increase your spending. And on the opposite end, Maybe you don't want to live in your kid's basement when you're 85. Well, if you want to have a high level of confidence that's not going to happen, you got to decrease your spending. So it gives you dynamic, or maybe it's, that $100,000 down payment for your kids. You want to do that over here. Yes, it's going to impact your nest egg, but if you're in the middle or upper end of this upper guardrail, you can afford to do that because you're not at that time, you're not close to that lower guardrail. And so the idea here is that it's dynamic, it's flexible. You have the opportunity to decrease spending or the opportunity to increase spending, and therefore give yourself the confidence that you won't run out of money or you won't leave that mattress stuffed full of cash. Now, a couple things before I wrap this up that I think are really important to point out. Number one, just because you hit that upper guardrail, you don't have to increase your spending, because if you're already in a position where all of your life needs are being met with whatever it is that you're withdrawing from your portfolio, you don't necessarily need to increase it. It's not going to necessarily increase your level of happiness just because you're able to spend more money. There's plenty of research on that. And then on the opposite end, if you hit that lower guardrail, for some people, that cut may be too much. And so if a significant cut, because if you experience a really bad market environment, like a financial crisis, you could end up having multiple cuts in your spending, which may be extremely uncomfortable for some retirees. And in that case, if you want to reduce the probability of cuts, then start with a little lower initial withdrawal rate. 5 may still be fine, because the research actually discovered you can start as high as 6%, maybe even a little bit higher, but you would have to be okay with those cuts. And that may be acceptable, especially given the fact that, as we talked about in the spending smile, spending is always higher in the front end of retirement. It starts to taper off and then it increases on the back end of retirement. So that's kind of the premise behind this research. Is like, hey, wait a second, the 4%, yeah, it's a good starting point, but that's not enough. And this is a kind of the next iteration of that approach that's more dynamic in nature. Doesn't solve all the problems, but it's definitely a step forward. Now, I hope you found this information and how I drew it out helpful. In future videos, I'm going to expand on everything financial planning, because this is kind of the starting point, the retirement distribution strategy. This is, it's your accumulation, and therefore what you're starting with as your bucket of money to live off of in retirement. How do you accumulate effectively? How do you distribute effectively? How do you plan for taxes? How do you plan for long-term care? All of that. So this is kind of the foundation. And the whole point of this channel is to talk about financial planning strategies and provide education. So we'll expand it from here. All right, that's all for today. Take care.